Hello, I'm doing this video here exploring the question of whether Noahide is a cult. And there's been people that have asked this question. People have made this, not just asked the question, but have made this proclamation as such. And therefore, I want to look into it. The major question then is what is a cult? And there's many different, it's a very vague term. And different people have different ideas as to what a cult is. One person's cult is another person's faith. So, what is it that makes something a cult? One definition might be um, when I was in the evangelical church, we would, anybody who disagreed with us or anybody who threatened to pull away adherents from our particular faith might be labeled a cult. It would be New Age philosophy, Hinduism, Islam, anything that would pull people away from adherence to the doctrine of the evangelical church would be labeled as a cult. And that's how some people see it. They see a cult as something that has a competing religion, a threatening religion. Another definition of a cult might, one of the more common definitions of a cult is something where people are trying to make money, or they're trying to have a sense of power over other people. They look at the leadership of the religious group as being the definition of whether or not it's a cult. The criteria for defining it as a cult is based upon the definition or the structure of the religious organization. I look at it in a different manner. I see a cult as the way that it holds on to the individual, more of a kind of a psychological view of the person is attached to the cult. They're attached to the group dynamic, or the the dynamic of the religious group holds on to a person in a very, I don't know how to word it, oppressive manner. The person involved in a cult will not feel that they can leave. They feel a necessity to belong to the group, and a fear that they might be cast out. And if they're cast out, there's a fear of whatever happens to be outside. Now, I know that that's kind of a broad definition that it could include, let's say, the evangelicals. Evangelicals believe that if you leave, you're going to burn in hell for all eternity. Now, I wouldn't necessarily consider evangelicals, in at least in the American experience, to be a cult, because it's possible to leave the particular church and go down the street, find a slightly different church, and still function. It's not that the church itself traps the person. They can still find something else, and in a couple stages away, they can find themselves in non-evangelical surroundings. So it's possible for a person to leave the evangelical churches within America, and therefore I would not necessarily call it a cult, although there are individual churches that might have a more oppressive approach, that they feel that if they leave that particular thing, that they're gonna be in trouble. The scary outside will come crashing after them. So, and also another part of this definition I'm using is that it varies according to the individual. I place it on the individual as to whether or not it's considered a cult, is whether or not the individual can walk away, or if they feel trapped and they can't walk away. A lot of that depends on the individual, just as much as it does on the group dynamics. So it's possible that within a particular religious group, an individual might feel trapped while everybody around them doesn't feel trapped. So for that individual, it's a cult, and for everybody else, it's not a cult. So it's a difficult to use definition, but it's still the one that I prefer. And the evangelical church that I belonged to before becoming a Noahide was very enthusiastic, very on fire for the Lord, and there was a whipped up group dynamic that for myself I felt comfortable. I felt I could walk away. I didn't feel trapped by it, even though I enjoyed the enthusiasm. I didn't feel trapped. Other people did not feel trapped, but I found out through online interactions that there were people that did feel trapped. So for those people who felt trapped, the evangelical church that I used to belong to might for them be a cult, but for other people would not be a cult. Okay, so I take this definition where I place the idea of it being a cult on the individual. So how do I use it for a group dynamic? My suggestion is that if a group dynamic is designed in such a way to hold on to people, the goal is to hold on to people and not let people leave, then that group dynamic would be considered a cult as a group. Is the group dynamic designed to hold people in? So I take this definition and I apply it to what I'm involved in today and what I anticipate being involved in going forward is the Noahide. Now, within the Noahide, it's the people that get involved in Noahide tend to be the same sort of people as the church I used to belong to, very on fire, very excited, very enthusiastic people. Within that dynamic, there are people that might be prone to cult, getting trapped in the cult. And there are people that have said that Noahide would be a cult because they see this dynamic occurring. They see the potential, at least, for this dynamic with certain individuals. And there's certain individuals that might be said to be involved in cult, even though that for everybody else, I would suggest for everybody else, this doesn't exist as such. I could walk away. And so for myself, I would not consider it to be a cult, but that's my personality. I tend to be very sure of myself and not needing the group dynamic to go forward. I can operate pretty much autonomously. And so I associate with the people that I associate with out of a free choice. Part of what helps the Noahide is the fact that we don't have organizational structures, or to the large extent, we don't have organizational structures. We exist independently and interact through the internet. And through the internet, there's so many different ideas floating around that it's possible for a person to gravitate one way or another. That does not mean that the potential does not exist, that individuals might feel this internal loyalty that requires them to specifically be in one space, and they don't, that's the individual. They're not really trapped, but they think they're trapped because they have a personality that's trapped. So I would argue that Noahide is not a cult. We have a lot of flexibility within it, and there's also the flexibility to move different degrees away from it. The only argument is that the people need to be decent human beings. That's the only real requirement. Beyond that, there's no real major requirements. It's just, people have to live their lives as decent human beings to cause 7 laws, which most religions agree with anyway. So it's not designed in a way that traps people into the group dynamic. Thank you.